Welcome to the Great Loop Radio podcast, brought to you by America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. We're dedicated to sharing Great Loop information and inspiration with those actively cruising, planning for, or dreaming about a Great Loop adventure. I'm Kim Russo. I'm the director of AGLCA. And today our topic is a great one for those of you who are still planning, or even those of you who are on the loop and perhaps are ready for a refresher. We are going to be talking about some of the rules of the road. And Robert Rice, who is with the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary, he's an instructor for them, is going to be joining me. But before we jump into the conversation, I want to take just a moment to recognize and thank our Admiral sponsors who support AGLCA at the highest level. They are Curtis Stokes and Associates, Passage Maker Trawler Fest, Great Loop Yacht Sales, Skipper Bob Publications, and Waterway Guide Media. As always, we encourage our listeners to support these businesses that support the Great Loop. And with the business out of the way, Rob Rice, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Kim. I'm glad to be here. As you kind of said in the intro, I'm a member of the Coast Guard's all-volunteer, that is unpaid component, the Coast Guard Auxiliary, where I'm a boating safety instructor. I hold instructor qualifications from the American Sailing Association and have taught sailing for quite a long time now. So this is sort of right up my alley.
Yeah, and you also have been moving your own boat along the Great Loop route for, God, do you know how many miles you've moved it from?
I think the total is now close to 1,002 jumps. We started out north of St. Louis at Port Charles, moved at one hop to Green Turtle Bay Marina, paused there to get a little bit of work done. And then the college student son and I just moved the boat about 750 miles from there to New Orleans, and I'm about to go back, pick up the boat, finish the move to home, which is in the Galveston Bay area.
Yeah, so you've done a good portion of the Great Loop at this point, as well as
Yes.
that stretch from Mobile Bay towards Galveston, at least got to New Orleans. And that is a place a lot of loopers aspire to visit. So just real short detour before we get up to the actual topic, but how did you find the cruise from Mobile Bay to New Orleans?
So, having done all of that stretch in the Western Rivers, I was curious how that would play out. Mobile Bay is vast. It was a little hard to wrap your head around just how large Mobile Bay is. In the middle of it, you look left and you look right. You're not sure if you're actually seeing shoreline at all. Mm-hmm. You might not be. There's substantial commercial shipping traffic in Mobile Bay. And then to make that right turn is mostly in protected waters behind Dauphin Island off of the coast of Alabama, and then into the ICW in protected waters. And then New Orleans, you go right through all kinds of commercial shipping areas. We're in a marina just off of Lake Pontchartrain. Lake Pontchartrain is quite large, so there's some weather patterns there to deal with. And then when we finish the hop, we'll go through some of the busiest waters in New Orleans as we actually cross the Mississippi River and through two of the busiest locks in that area. So we've got a lot of interesting travel ahead of us.
Yeah, from what it's been described to me as a pretty commercial section
Mm-hmm.
of the waterway if you head for New Orleans. Not a whole lot, although there are a few stops, but not a whole lot for recreational vessels, but absolutely doable for those who have an interest. Yep. Or for those who home port out of the Houston area, as you do. We have more and more loopers starting the loop from there. So they're tackling that, kind of challenging part right from the get-go. But today we want to talk about the rules of the road. And we've covered this before. And, I like to bring this up every so often because we do have lots of loopers who are new to boating and who couldn't use a refresher. We're doing the absolute basics today, things that you really should know. And I think perhaps the most challenging for us in terms of educating loopers are probably the people who have been weekend boaters. I'm sure you're out near Galveston, Rob, and I've been out near Charleston in a small boat, and it appears that there are no rules whatsoever.
And that I think is definitely a challenge. Many recreational boaters have very little idea that there are navigational rules, collision rules that they apply to recreational boats. It's a real challenge. And certainly that's something we see in the Coast Guard Auxiliary as we teach basic boating safety courses. Typically, we find recreational boaters come to those classes with no idea at all that how these things work. None.
Yeah. And in a lot of states, a course like that is still not required. So a lot of people take to the boat and just hit the water. And may have been boating for many years, but really not have a grasp on these rules of the road. And it never
Exactly.
fails to pop up on social media that someone flying an AGLCA Virgie did something that was
Mm,
interpreted as wrong, impolite,
yep.
dangerous. The list goes on and on. And
Right.
my take on that is that generally that is someone who is not trying to be discourteous and someone who's not trying to be unsafe. They simply don't know better. So today I'm hoping we can kind of start that or repeat, because we do this every so often, but really kind of get the word out on here's the absolute basics and kind of plant that seed that there is more to know than just turn the key and go. So
Sure.
with that in mind, just to perhaps encourage some people to actually learn and understand and practice the rules of the road, let's start out with what is some of the penalties could be if you don't know them or if you don't practice them.
Sure. So the navigation rules are really the same idea roughly as the fact that when you drive a car on the street or the highway, you have traffic laws that apply to you. There are rules of the road for cars. And this is exactly the same idea. Just like every car on the road has obligations in terms of what the rules are, same thing applies to boats. And boaters who don't know what the navigation rules are likely to blunder into a dangerous situation that they've contributed to or created because of their lack of knowledge or lack of understanding how to respond in a particular situation or not knowing what to do, and either cause an accident, contribute to an accident, and very likely found to be at fault for some part of the causation of that accident. That's sort of the basic problem. The one thing I would urge boaters to do is get yourself a physical copy of the rules of the road. You can download them and save them on a laptop or tablet or phone. But it's, I think, much easier to look at them, to think about them, to pick up a physical paperback copy of the book and thumb through it to get to look things up as you go along. I think that enhances learning, and that's super easy to do.
Yeah.
The NAV rules do require that most looper-sized boats are mandated to carry a copy of the rules. So vessels 12 meters and over are required under Rule 1 to actually carry a copy of the rules on board.
And that can be a digital copy at this point, as
It
long as it's
can.
readily accessible, correct?
The U.S. Coast Guard guidance from a couple of years ago is that a digital copy is acceptable as long as it is a locally downloaded, locally stored copy accessible without an internet connection. So save that PDF to phone, tablet, or laptop, and you're good to go. You can easily find the NAV rules. The fastest search would be USCG navigation rules, and the first 1, 2, or 3 results are going to be directly to the Coast Guard's website and a copy you can download and save. NOAA, the weather and mapping folks, publishes the same thing in a slightly different version. The Coast Pilot books published by NOAA include the NAV rules as a chapter, I think, at the back of the book for each of them. And then you can buy paperback copies from all kinds of marine supply outfits.
Yeah. So let's start with some of the basics that don't even yet get into overtaking stand-on vessel. Let's just start with things like maintaining watch. Tell us what's required
Oh,
there and what
absolutely.
that even
So
means.
we'll start with the super basics, and that is
Yeah.
no surprise here. The rules require every vessel, and vessel basically anything that floats and can move about on the water. So a looper boat is very definitely a vessel within the meaning of the navigation rule. So Rule 5 says that every vessel must at all times maintain a proper lookout, both by sight and by hearing, to be situationally aware. Super, super, super important. Essentially what this means is you have to be actually and actively be paying attention to what's going on around you. You have to resist the temptation, which I think is hard, to be playing with your phone, reading a paperback book with your feet propped up on the helm, sort of steering with your left foot. You can do that in a boat where you can't really in a car unless you're driving a self-driving car, in which case you probably shouldn't be anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be actively engaged in paying attention. The rules also requires you to actively use all available means appropriate in the circumstances to evaluate the situation around you. Pretty clearly, that all available means piece means that if you have radar, you need to know how to use it, and when appropriate, you need to be using it. And if you have AIS, I think by implication, the rule means that if you have AIS, you should be using it, paying attention to it, and know what it is and how to use it. I think the best time to learn how to use radar is on a bright sunny day where you can see everything around you. Turn the radar on and start figuring out what the radar display means.
Mhm. Perfect. Some of the other basics, and you mentioned both visually and hearing as part of keeping watch. In addition to maintaining watch, looking for other boats, looking for debris, looking for obstructions, um, lights are part of kind of these basics, as are sound signals. So let's kind
Right. So
of tackle those two.
lights super important. So there are 4 kinds of lights that a boat must have, vessel must have. Your red and green side lights, you'll see those are required. A masthead light and a stern light, although if your vessel is a little bit smaller, on the smaller end of a looper size, so under 12 meters, the masthead light plus the stern light can be combined into a single all-around white light. Otherwise, you have a separate masthead light that points mostly forward, and then a separate stern light, which shows a sector at the rear, and then an anchor light. Those come into play from sunset across the night to sunrise, and anytime in limited visibility. So, for example, coming down the Tombigbee River on a day that was supposed to be pretty okay, overcast with the occasional scattered light rain, we got some very heavy bands of rain, 2 very heavy bands of rain, which turned day into almost night. And so in the middle of the day, I'm turning on my navigation lights. I think an important point there is know which switches turn on which set of lights so that you're not scrambling. Okay, did I just turn on the anchor light or did I turn on my masthead light? You want to know what you've turned on and be confident about that. But the important part there is at night or in limited visibility, you need to be displaying those lights as required. You need to check every once in a while that the lights still display correctly. And then, of course, if you anchor out, that's when you need to be using that anchor light. So the anchor light is an all-around white light, not required if you're in a marina or if you're in certain kinds of Coast Guard designated anchorages, typically not our issue for loopers. But if you're just anchored out along the side of the river or someplace in an inlet off the ICW, you need to display that anchor light. The rules say that a vessel may also display additional lights to illuminate its deck in addition to the anchor light. And I think that's a wise idea. So aboard my boat, we have some long life LED lanterns. One of them goes on the foredeck, one goes in the aft cockpit, one goes on the flybridge. I want it to be super obvious at 3 a.m. That my boat is there. It's not going anywhere. And I please don't want to be run down by a barge or a fisherman headed out at 3 a.m. to get to his favorite fishing spot at sunrise.
Yeah, great advice. And, especially a lot of loopers don't plan to be out. Anchoring's a different story, but don't plan to be navigating at night. But
Right.
the,
In a
less than ideal
rainstorm,
weather happens.
yeah, less than ideal weather can catch you. So that happened to me on the Tombigbee in one of those stretches where the river snakes almost in complete figure eights.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a short but brutally hard band of rain that blew through. So for about half an hour, it was incredibly hard rain. And so very, very limited visibility. And that was an instance where we actually turned around and went back upstream to find a safer spot to wait out the rainstorm.
Yeah. And in addition to that, sometimes you're delayed by a lock or something else unexpected,
Absolutely.
and you can be out there
Yep.
after dark when that wasn't originally in your plan. So I love the
Absolutely.
idea of, knowing where the switches are, being real comfortable with reaching right out and getting
Yep.
to the right switches to make sure you've got everything you need.
Yep.
We've got a
Absolutely.
lot we want to cover today. Let's take a quick break. Actually, let's go on to sound signals
Okay.
because I did mention that. And before we cut that off, let's go ahead and talk about the sound signals a little bit.
So sound signals are one of those things that almost no recreational boaters know anything about. Every commercial mariner knows exactly what the sound signals are, how to use them, and what they mean. Almost no recreational boaters do. So if you give a proper sound signal to a recreational boater because you're going to pass them, you're probably going to get a signal back, but it's going to be a rude hand signal rather than a repeat of the sound signal or some comprehension. But it's still important that you know, because the collision rules, the navigation rules require use of sound signals in certain circumstances. So I want to talk first about some non-meeting and passing sound signals too that you may well hear. One is one prolonged blast, and that has two possible meanings in different circumstances. One is a vessel coming around a bend or past some obstruction, which makes it hard to see potential oncoming traffic, is going to give one prolonged blast to alert somebody around the corner, if you will, here I come. The proper response is one prolonged blast in response to let that vessel know that, yep, I'm here, I'm coming too. We both need to be paying attention. The other meaning of one prolonged blast is a vessel about to pull away from a pier or dock or berth will give one prolonged blast as a warning to surrounding vessels that, okay, I'm about to come off my mooring and head out. The second one, and this one is actually really important. You probably won't ever hear it. You hope you won't. And that is 5 or more short, rapid blasts. And that is sort of a danger or doubt signal. So that happens when a vessel can't figure out what somebody else is doing and thinks the other vessel is about to blunder into or has blundered into danger. If you hear that, if you hear 5 or more short or rapid blasts on a horn, particularly if you hear it from something that sounds low, rumbly, and just a bit bass to the note, that is a big vessel. There's actually a rule that regulates the tone of the horn blasts, and larger vessels have a more rumbly, more bass note, smaller vessels a higher note. But if you hear that 5 or more short, rapid blasts on the horn, the first thing that should happen is you should snap instantly awake. Your head is on a swivel, and you want to figure out, am I the one who's blundered into danger? What's the issue? Where is this vessel that's just given this sound signal? What do I need to do to stay safe?
Excellent. And while we're talking about sound signals, let's go ahead and cover the 1 and 2 whistles, because they do originate back to the days of sound signals.
Exactly.
But they're now called over the VHF. So go ahead and
almost always, right?
To us. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I traveled close to 1,000 miles in the rivers in ICW, and I never once heard an actual sound signal. I talked to a bunch of barge towboat captains, and we had this conversation as if we were making sound signals. That's the most common thing. So there are 2 sound signals, a 1 whistle and a 2 whistle. And actually was at a meeting of sponsored by the local Coast Guard Command about a year ago of towboat captains and recreational boaters. And one of the towboat captains explained it this way, which I thought is just brilliant. Let's think about an analog clock, and your boat is pointing towards 12 o'clock. And just to the right is 1 o'clock with the number 1, and just to the left is 11. But think of that 11 as a Roman numeral 2. So here I am bebopping along, and I need to either meet or pass a vessel in front of me. If I'm going to shift my boat ever so slightly even to my right, to my starboard, I'm now pointing at 1 o'clock. That's a 1 whistle meter, a 1 whistle pass. On the other hand, if I'm going to shift my boat the other way, a little bit towards my left, I'm pointing now at Roman numeral 2. That's a 2 whistle meeting or pass. And that works whether you're meeting head to head or whether you're overtaking and passing that way.
Yeah, and I'm glad you shared the clock analogy, because that is the easiest way.
Once you get that picture in your head, it's super obvious and super easy to keep straight. But here's the way it typically works. So I'm coming down the river, and I see off in the distance a barge string approaching me going upstream. In my travels, I have had AIS receive only on my boat. So I know the name of the towboat that's pushing that barge string. So I pick up the VHF radio and I call the towboat because I know their name. This is super easy. And that's going to sound something like, let's say the tug is Mary Rose. It's going to sound something like Mary Rose, this is slow dancing. That's me. Channel 13. And I'm going to say channel 13 because I'm going to be on channel 13, which is the bridge to bridge or ship's helm to ship's helm navigational coordination channel. That's where all the commercial vessels are going to be doing this kind of thing, and where they're expecting you, even as a recreational boater, they're expecting you to call them on channel 13. But I'm going to say channel 13 because that tugboat captain probably has 3 radios at least on the helm. And if I say channel 13, it ups the odds he grabs the right microphone to respond back to me. So the response, and I'm going to say, Mary Rose, this is Pleasure Craft, Slow Dancing, channel 13. And I'm probably going to get a response that sounds like, go ahead, Pleasure Craft. And I'm going to say, sir, I'm the Pleasure Craft about a half a mile above you, off your bow. Which side would you like me on? He's the guy pushing like an entire warehouse full of stuff up the river who can't maneuver. So I want to know what he wants me to do to be safe. He's probably plied that river stretch once a week for the last 3 years or something. He really knows what he's doing. And the response is going to be something like this. He's going to say, well, let's do a 1 whistle pass port to port. He's probably going to say it that way. About half the barge captains did, because they don't know whether I actually know what a 1 whistle pass means. My response to him would be, got it, 1 whistle, port to port. Thank you, sir. I want to echo back to him what he just said. That way I do 2 things. One is we both confirm what the plan is. And the other thing is I kind of cement it in my head so that I actually do the right thing. It gives him a chance to say, whoa, that's not what I said. We want to make sure we're both in clear agreement about what the plan is. That's all you got to do.
Yeah. And
super
very
easy.
simple. The analog clock analogy, I think is key. People just seem to get it when you explain it that way.
It's the most, once you hear it, it's super obvious and really easy to keep in your head and to picture in the moment when you're looking up or down the river, the canal or ICW, and have this barge ahead of you or approaching you, and you're trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing I would say about that meeting or passing thing, right, is there are places, for example, in the Western rivers, in the Mississippi, for example, upper Mississippi, the river can be 3/4 of a mile wide easily, with 90% of it pretty deep. That barge captain is going to keep his string of barges in the marked channel, but there's absolutely no reason why a recreational boat can't just get out of the channel where it's 30 foot deep and just stay out of the way. And then you never have to worry about even being close to them. That's really easy to do. There's plenty of water depth in most places, so that's just never an issue.
Yeah.
And every once in a great while, you'll call the barge towboat captain, and you just never get a response. That happened once or twice, and in those cases, I just made my best judgment where I thought I could be safe, hugged one bank or the other, looked for a little wider spot typically, and then hugged one bank or the other, went really slow so I could maintain position in a good spot and just let him go past me and waved at him as he went by. Who knows why he didn't respond?
Yeah. Well, and always, of course, use caution moving out of the channel. When we were coming down last fall, the rivers were extremely low. So the width, first of all, when the river's down 20 feet, the width is not what it usually is, and neither is the depth anywhere along there. So, obviously leaving the channel, always be cautious, but in general, in Western rivers, there's plenty of space there on the Western rivers in particular. We're going to talk a little bit about what to do, some considerations for kind of narrower channels too, as we continue the conversation. I also want to mention, since we were just talking about the 1 and 2 whistle, and that's commonly used with commercial traffic, we do have scheduled for next week on the podcast is a commercial towboat captain that works primarily in New York Harbor.
Great idea.
And as there are lots of loopers in the New York Harbor area right now, he's going to share what he wishes loopers knew about dealing with some of the commercial traffic. So,
and what I came away from this conversation, which was sponsored by the local Coast Guard Command Center here, and they brought commercial towboat captains and recreational boaters together to have a conversation about all this kind of stuff. And what the towboat captain said was, call us. Our interest is getting about our day safely. We don't want to run you over. There's too much paperwork. I mean, we don't want to run you over. Call us and let's talk about it. And if you're not sure, if I say, let's have a 2 whistle pass, and you don't know what that means, don't be bashful about saying, what does that mean exactly? And just use words to say it out loud.
Yeah. Like so many things in life, it really just comes down to effectively communicating. So
absolutely.
that's all that, So, okay, let's go ahead and take that break I mentioned. When we come
Okay.
back, I want to go ahead and dive into, some words that if you have not had any boating training, things like stand on or give way vessel and what that means and who does what is probably kind of confusing to you. So we'll dive into that when we come back. We'll be back in a
Okay.
moment. Dawtaw Island, created by nature and reserved just for you. A hidden gem of the South Carolina Lowcountry, Dawtaw Island is a private community catering to the active lifestyle. Golf, tennis, pickleball, croquet, bocce, 33-acre nature preserve, and the full-service Dawtaw Island Marina. Just outside of historic Beaufort, South Carolina, and a short ride to Charleston, Savannah, and Hilton Head. Reserve your overnight stay and call ahead to arrange use of the island's amazing amenities. Marine Tech Services is on site to cater to all your repairs and maintenance. Destination, Dawtaw Island. Visit dawtaw.com. That's DATAW.com. Schwartz and Company Yacht Sales is a boutique yacht sales organization and a proud supporter of AGLCA, loopers, and adventurous souls throughout the Great Lakes. We are the exclusive representative for American Tug throughout the Great Lakes region, including the Canadian provinces of Ontario and Quebec. We are very active in the yacht brokerage market on both the buy side and sell side, providing our guidance and resources to valued customers. We also work with shipbuilders both in the US and abroad to bring our customers' unique dreams to life. We welcome the opportunity to earn your business. We're back on Great Loop Radio. Today, my guest is Robert Rice. He is an instructor with the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and he is out of the Houston, Texas area where he provides classes. And we are just moving on to talk about stand on and give way vessels. So let's start again, with the basics. Go ahead and define those two things for us.
Okay. So that concept that in any meeting or crossing situation, one vessel is always stand on and one vessel is always give way is fundamental to being able to understand basically all the rest of the navigation rules. So the idea is this, except in one narrow circumstance, which I'll come back to later, nobody has right of way. One vessel has stand on, one vessel is give way, but each vessel has obligations. They both have obligations to help make sure that the meeting or crossing situation goes safely. So let's think about it this way. Stand on vessel is the one that keeps doing what it's doing, maintains course and speed, and does nothing crazy, right? You need to be super predictable. That's the whole point. So that the other vessel, the give way vessel, can maneuver safely around you, secure in the knowledge, we hope, that you're not going to do anything crazy. The give way vessel has the obligation to get out of the way. I sometimes say that the give way vessel is the get the heck out of the way or keep out of the way vessel. Their obligation is to maneuver safely, to make changes in course and speed necessary to safely avoid any risk of collision. One important point for the give way vessel is that the give way vessel needs to make any changes to course and speed as substantial changes. So don't change speed by dropping your speed 1 knot or 2 knots. Change speed by cutting your speed in half. Don't make a 5-degree course change, make a 45-degree course change. It needs to be really big so that the stand-on vessel can understand what you're doing and know that you're actually taking active action to avoid the risk of a collision. Now, there is one circumstance where there is somebody actually has right of way, and that means that the vessel with right of way has sort of a superior right to navigate, and everybody else has to get out of the way. And that is in the Western rivers, the Mississippi, Ohio, Tennessee, Tombigbee, where there's substantial commercial shipping traffic. In the Western rivers, a downbound vessel with a following current has right of way, and everybody else has an obligation to avoid. A little different situation. The important thing is everybody has obligations in a meeting or crossing situation where there's any risk of collision.
So let's talk about what those obligations are, and let's, again, break it down. Let's start with a crossing situation where two boats paths will be crossing if nobody changes course.
Okay, the navigation rules are really not that hard, and the ones we're going to talk about, if you cast your mind back to your misspent youth when you did driver's ed, Most of the rules are actually pretty similar to what you learned in driver's ed. So let's go back to driver's ed and think about what happens when two cars arrive at a neighborhood intersection where there's stop signs and it's a four-way stop. Two cars arrive simultaneously, say one on the north street and one on the east side. Who goes first? Well, your rules of the road say that the car on the right-hand side, most right-hand side, goes first. It's just an arbitrary rule. Somebody's got to go first. It's actually the same thing for boats. It's even easier with boats because there's a visual reminder. So let's think about this. Here we've got our vessel. We've got a second vessel. They're approaching sort of at right angles. The vessel that has the other one on its starboard side is give way. Well, that means the one over here right hand most is stand on. It goes first. But let's think about what the navigation lights are on that vessel over here. If I'm vessel A and I've got vessel B over here to my starboard side, if I look over here at vessel B, which navigation light am I going to see? I'm going to see his port side navigation light, which is red. Think about that like as a red light at a stoplight. This vessel over here to the starboard side looks out to the vessel over here off its port side. It's going to see the green navigation light on this vessel. Think of that as the green light on a stoplight. It actually is pretty easy when you start thinking about the navigation lights. And that, I'm pretty sure, is intentional in the design of the way the navigation lights are rigged on boats. Part of the idea behind the navigation lights is you can easily figure this stuff out at night just by looking at the lights. There's sort of a whole art and science of understanding all the possible lights. Loopers don't have to figure that out, but you do need to understand red and green nav lights. That actually helps you figure out these meeting and crossing situations. The other thing about a meeting or crossing situation like that is if you're crossing, the giveaway vessel should always avoid trying to pass in front of the stand-on vessel, because if you misjudge the speed or the circumstances, now you're stranded yourself right in front of the stand-on vessel is going to plow into you. So the giveaway vessel should either wait or pass behind the stand-on vessel. That's actually baked into Rule 15, a requirement to avoid crossing in front of the stand-on vessel.
Okay, so we got it for crossing situations. Let's talk about in a meeting situation. Who is the stand-on vessel and who is the giveaway?
Right, head to head. So I'm from Texas, so I always explain it like this. So let's suppose we're out in the middle of nowhere, Texas, on a little narrow country road, and we're driving our beat up old pickup truck straight down the middle of the country road. And off in the distance, we see another person in their beat up old pickup truck coming towards us. What are you going to do? Are you going to stay in the middle of the road and say, buddy, you got to get out of my way? Are you going to slide to your left? You're going to slide to your right? Well, you would slide to your right. Cars drive on the right-hand side of the road. Works the same way for boats. In a head-to-head situation, each vessel, this is a circumstance where both vessels have an equal obligation to do the same thing. That is, both vessels have an obligation to slide off to the side of the channel towards their starboard side, to slide to their right. So each vessel slides to its respective right-hand starboard side to give each other space, and then they pass port to port. Super easy.
Perfect. Super easy. And if you are keeping track, if you're meeting someone and you're going to point your boat a little bit to the right, then you are moving to the one whistle.
That's correct.
Yes,
right. With a barge, right, with a commercial, with a string of barges, we're going to have that conversation with the barge captain, particularly in the Western rivers, where those rivers can be very windy. That barge captain has to maneuver what is potentially a very long and very wide string of barges. And they're going to take one side or the other of the river in order to be able to easily swing that barge string around. So they have definite opinions on where's the safest place for you, which is why rather than simply relying on the idea, yeah, I'm just going to slide off to my right and I'm going to assume the barge captain is going to do the same thing, you need to have that conversation with the barge captain.
Absolutely. We actually had a circumstance just, I guess, over the weekend where pretty narrow channel, could see on AIS that there was a barge coming. And there was also a little group of boats beached just along the riverbank and people in the water
Yes.
swimming. And
Yes.
the barge
Been there,
captain
done
actually
that, got the
said,
T-shirt.
yep, the barge captain said, you just hold right there
Yeah.
rather than I'll see you on the one or the two. I'm
Yeah,
gonna come by
and I
you.
will
And that worked too.
sing
We
the
were more than
praises.
happy. Yeah,
Yeah.
we were more than
I'm going to
happy
sing
to
the
have that
praises of
instruction.
AIS for exactly that kind of situation. And for me,
Yep.
it was in this blinding rainstorm in a place where the Tennessee River snaked almost in a complete figure eight, and another big flood or two, and the 500 yards of land separating the two loops were probably going to dissolve, and it would be Oxbow Lakes separated by a much more direct river. So I could see the barge captain around the loop about 500 yards to my left. I couldn't actually see him because of the trees, but I knew he was there. And so I had this conversation with the barge captain. And he said, look, this rain is crazy. I'm actually just pushing my string of barges up against the shore and I'm staying put. I said, I think it's going to be safer if I come ahead and get past you before you crank it up again. It's like, absolutely. Come on, bring it on, brother.
Yeah. Oh, and again, it all boils down to the communication and recognizing
Absolutely.
that these tow captains know their stuff. So
They
whatever
do,
advice they're
right?
giving
And
you is
they're,
really important to follow.
they know the river. They know where it's safe for them to be. They know where the wide spots or the tricky spots are. They know how they're going to have to maneuver to be able to nudge their string of barges around curves. Their interest is going home safe at the end of the day. They don't want to run you over. They want you to go home safe. And so, don't be bashful about reaching out to them and say, Captain, what would you like me to do? What do you think is going to be safest for both of us here?
Yeah. Oh, and they are going to be much more pleased if you contact them multiple times on the radio to get clarification.
Yes.
Than if you just
Absolutely.
maintain radio silence and nobody knows
Absolutely.
what's going on. So
Absolutely.
they would much prefer that. So we talked about crossing, we talked about meeting. Let's talk about an overtaking situation back to, our giveaway and our stand on vessel.
I'll go back to my driver's ed example. You're driving down the freeway and I don't know, somebody's grandpa is driving way too slow on the freeway. Did you just run him over? No, of course not. You recognize that the car in front of you is driving slower than you are and that you need to safely pass. So you're probably going to swing out into the left lane when it's safe to do so, get past them, get back into the correct lane, and then keep going. You're going to do the same sort of thing in a boat. So this is particularly important for the vessel that is slower being overtaken to maintain course and speed so that the vessel passing you, the faster one overtaking, can judge how to do that in a safe way. The slower overtaken vessel maintains course and speed, maybe goes ahead before that pass happened and slides off to their starboard a little bit to give the overtaking, the faster vessel, a little extra room to manage that pass. The overtaking vessel passes and then goes on their merry way. This is certainly a place for you to manage your wake. I know in my boat, if I'm blowing along at the fuel gulping speed of 15 knots, it throws up an enormous wake. And so I'm not going to pass people at 15 knots, even another looper size boat, because I'm going to toss them around. I'm certainly not going to pass a smaller boat at that speed. So I'm going to slow way down, figure out what I'm doing, and then sort of pass them at the slowest speed I can manage and still pass them. So that I have the least wake effects around me.
Yeah. And I just want to point out there because wakes is another thing that tends to blow up on social media quite a bit. And one thing that I have learned along the way, and I'll take this back to the kind of the driver's ed thing as well. If you are the slower boat and you are being overtaken, maintaining speed and course is important, but communicating with that other boat and offering you also to slow down, as long as they know that you're doing that. If you're at 10 knots and they're at 17, if you maintain 10 knots, they have to maintain a pretty decent speed to get around you. So slow, if you are interested in not being waked, it also helps a lot if the stand-on vessel in that particular situation slows a bit, because if you're slower, they can pass you more slowly and therefore not wake you as much.
Absolutely.
And that is something I think, is not really necessarily part of the rules, but it's the communication. You certainly don't want to confuse the vessel that's overtaking you with your speed, but slowing down can result in you having less of a wake. And that kind of brings us to, that is certainly one consideration for a narrow channel. But are there any other considerations? We talked about the vastness of the Western rivers, and it's possible to dip out of the channel a little bit in most cases.
Right.
Some narrow waterways, that is not the
That's
case.
not an
So
option.
what are
Right.
the other considerations for those areas?
So NAV Rule 9 tells smaller vessels, in this case, 20 meters or under, that you have an obligation not to impede the passage of a larger vessel that can only navigate inside the marked channel. This is both when you're traveling along in a channel or when you're crossing a channel. And if you're in waterways with large amounts of commercial traffic, there's actually a separate rule specifically for very busy ports that says the same thing, that if you have a traffic management system with dedicated shipping lanes, smaller vessels have to cross those at right angles and cannot impede the commercial shipping. One thing that's important to understand is that if you are along a commercial waterway and you can see a commercial vessel approaching you basically head on, it's very deceptive about how far they are away and how fast they're moving. And they're probably closer and moving faster than you think. The perspective of somebody coming towards you makes it very difficult to gauge just what that distance is. That's an area where you want to exercise caution. And where AIS can help you, because you can look at, you can see that AIS target. Nearly all maybe commercial vessels are actually going to have AIS transponders and be transmitting as they're required. And so you'll be able to see the commercial vessel on your chart plotter display, and you can see their speed and you can see their range by the placement of their little icon on your chart plotter. And if you have your chart plotter set up with range rings, you can then see pretty easily how far away they are. But you just need to be really cautious about crossing or traveling in a busy commercial waterway. The problem, of course, is a large commercial cargo ship has very poor visibility looking forward from their pilot house. There's a very large blind spot where they just can't see right in front of them. It's blocked by the bow of the ship. And they can run you over, not have seen you at all, and won't even know that they've run you over. They won't feel it. So you need to stay well out of the way of commercial cargo ships. And of course, for a very large cargo ship, a tanker or a freighter, it requires an enormous distance for them to stop. And if they're in, like in my home waters in Galveston Bay, the Houston Ship Channel, of course, is this trench cut in the bottom of the very shallow Galveston Bay. A commercial ship cannot turn out of the channel, literally cannot. The bay is about 9 feet and a cargo ship needs about 20. They literally cannot turn out of the channel. So if you're blunder into their path, there's not much they can do. So it requires real caution on the part of recreational boaters if you're around the cargo ships or freighters, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we have barely scratched the surface really of the navigation rules, and that's all we can do in this kind of format in this time frame. For those of you who have been inspired to learn more, there are courses around the country, and I'll let Rob tell us a little bit about how to find those. But Rob also did I think it was an 8-part basic boating safety series of webinars for AGLCA.
Right.
Those are available free to our members on our website. If you just log in with your membership account and go to the information menu, you'll see webinars and you can access it from there.
Yeah, we did. I think that's right. 8 topics and spent about 1 to 2 hours on each topic to do a little bit of a deeper dive than you would get, say, in a short basic boating safety class.
Yes, and we all learn differently, but if you are an in-person learner, where can people perhaps find a course
so there
that
are
they can go
2
take?
really good resources. I'm a member of the Coast Guard Auxiliary, so I'm going to tell you first about the Coast Guard Auxiliary's boating courses. And if you go to cgaux.org and look for public education, you can do a find a class listing, plug in your zip code, and it will give you locations where you can go to an in-person, live instructor-led in-person boating safety course. The basic boating safety course is 1 day, covers all of the state law required basic boating safety education components. Almost all states, that boating safety class is pretty much the same because all the state boating law administrators are working from the same sort of core curriculum agreed on between the states, so that there's a sort of state reciprocity. If you're a traveling boater and you have a National Association of State Boating Law Administrators compliant safe boating course, which basically all of them are, then you should be good every place you go.
Yeah. And also about the courses, I just want to stress that there is one state, at least one state on the loop that requires that for transiting boaters. New Jersey requires it now. New York and Florida, I believe, are both phasing it in. So you need to do this before you start the Great Loop.
You do, and it's the boating safety course is the basic orientation, the classroom course, basic orientation to all the fundamental sort of safety issues related to being safer on the water. Not a how to operate your boat kind of class, but let's figure out how to be safe. But so the Coast Guard Auxiliary local groups teach that all the time. It should not be hard to find one of those wherever you are.
Yeah.
The Coast Guard Auxiliary also teaches more in-depth classes. The 8-part series that I did, I worked from the curriculum called Boating Skills and Seamanship. That's a multi-part instructor-led course, usually 10 to 12 sessions, much more in-depth than the one-day basic boating safety class. The other organization that teaches this kind of thing on a regular basis is U.S. Power Squadron, now branded America's Boating Club, same outfit. They have local groups. They do boater safety education as well. Their basic boating safety class is very similar to the one I teach because we're all working from the same curriculum developed by the National Association of State Boating Law Administrators. They're very similar. And Power Squadron also does other kinds of boating safety, boating education courses. Both groups are great organizations. If you're looking for a way to get involved with a group of like-minded boaters, find one in your area, see what they've got to offer. Certainly check out their courses, and if joining one of them and becoming a more involved, educated boater is something you want to do, either organization is a good choice. If you're a sailor, American Sailing Association, and maybe to a lesser degree, U.S. Sailing offer all kinds of sailing courses. ASA has a network of sailing schools all over the place, quite a few of them. They offer, obviously, sailing classes, but much of what happens in those classes, probably 75% or better, is real pretty applicable to a power boater as well, just not the messing with the sales part. Lots of options. And then, of course, you can hire a training captain to work with you one-on-one. Go to an in-person sort of school. Chapman School of Seamanship in, where's that, Florida, does in-person classes. There's some other places like that. So there are plenty of options for getting some more better education. And the other thing is just spend time on your own boat. Make sort of learn to walk before you run, smaller ventures before you do bigger ventures, learn as you go, and then do some self-studying.
Robert Rice, great information shared today. Thank you for being with us. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah. And to everyone who has watched or listened today, we will be back next week with another episode of the Great Loop Radio podcast. Next week, we should be featuring a New York Harbor towboat captain. So that'll be a real interesting discussion. We'll look forward to seeing you then. Until then, safe cruising.